We're invited by Karen to speak at a landscape conference at the University of Lancaster a couple of years ago. It was another really great gathering of people sharing ideas, and since then we've stayed in touch with Karen and her writing. I'd really recommend the breadth of examples and work that she picks up on, and today she's going to talk about the work in the Dedan Valley in Cumbria, so another part of the north of England. So welcome, Karen.
It's great to be here. Thank you. So I worked at Lancaster University until last year, and I was part of the Future Places project. And what was interesting about that was it was basically a project looking at using data to help inform the future. But our boss, Richard, was very keen to include the arts as a form of data as well, and of course literature as a form of data. So that was where I came in. And so we did this Reimagining Landscapes conference. We did it twice, and we were bringing together farmers, ecologists, plant growers, writers. Rebecca Chesney, who I think was, she was pivotal actually, because she was the person who introduced me to Richard and Polly, which is where this journey began. But this is not the Dedan Valley. This is just a bit of I couldn't resist putting it in. The title of the talk is Prospect and Refuge, which is from geographer J. Appleton's theory that humans have preferences for environments that provide visibility and safety from where we can see what lies ahead and that offer a place to be at home. And I think that's a very apt metaphor in the current climate crisis where uncertainty is everywhere. So I'm going to talk about the Lake District, but this was a golf course in Aberfeldy in Perthshire, and it kept being inundated because of extreme weather events, and it's now this incredible wildflower meadow. So I think if ever there's a cultural change, you can't imagine a better reinterpretation of a golf course for the future. So big shout out to Richard and Polly. It was through them that my kind of journey into writing about plants began. I'm a rank amateur, I must say. I still have to use an app to identify wildflowers, but I'm on a journey. So I came down to Liverpool and Richard took me on a tour of some of the meadows they've been involved in. What was really lovely was last night I went to have a look at the meadow in Toxteth that I wrote about in the new book, and there was a couple of young women came walking down the path, and they were a bit away from me, and I just kept hearing this, wow, look at this, wow. So I kind of sidled along and said, it's amazing, isn't it? And one of them said she'd never been before and she only lived 100 yards away, and she couldn't believe how beautiful it was, and the evening light was streaming through the plants and it was exceptional. So I just think that was amazing. This person here is John Goff. He was born in 1757 in Kendal, where I'm from, in the Lake District, and he is the polymath you have never heard of. His biographer, Ian Hodkinson, said that if he'd been born in London, he would have been as famous as Darwin. But he was born in Kendal, so that was his lot. But what's really important about John Goff is that he was blinded at the age of 3, so became known as the blind botanist. He wrote papers on all kinds of things, but he explored the southern lakes, climbing into ravines, scrambling into gullies to get at ledges where some of our rarest wild plants exist. He went with his father when he was a young boy, and then he went with his son Thomas when his son was old enough to accompany him. So being blind didn't stop him from doing anything, and he went on to identify through touch and scent over 240 species of wildflowers in the Lake District. So, and on this visit with Richard to Liverpool, we went to the Royal School for the Blind, and that was a kind of apt metaphor to me to thinking about, well, actually, most of us are plant blind, me included. We've lost that connection to plants, and so, and yet you can be visually impaired and kind of still have that connection. So, I was reading E.O. Wilson, biologist and naturalist, and he uses the term biostalgia to articulate the ways in which humans have become isolated from wild species of all kinds, largely, though not exclusively, from urbanism. And I've been reading Immanuel Coccia, the Italian philosopher, who wrote that plants are the real mediators. They are the first eyes that appeared and opened themselves onto the world. The world is, above all, everything plants could make of it. So, here we are in the Lake District, where the sun always shines, it never rains, where the sky is always blue, and the roads are never log-jammed with tourists, or so the tourism industry would have you believe. As I write in my book, under the hegemony of business as the primary mode of seeing, the Lake District is the Truman Show of British tourism, a clipped and tidy place where skies are continually blue and where neither the too much rain nor the dangerous loss of habitats are ever allowed to obscure the view. So really what this talk is it's kind of, as much as anything, me thinking my way through the idea of a cultural landscape. I grew up in the Lake District, and the kind of rise of pushing tourism and a particular way of seeing the landscape has become incredibly damaging. So in 2017, the Lakes was awarded UNESCO World Heritage status. And what that did was it preserved a particular moment in time, which is the kind of post-war, Second World War period, when sheep grazing in the fells really took off. And what that intensive grazing has done, many of you will know, is it's reduced the flora on the fells and thereby the fauna, and the fells are no longer able to operate in terms of extreme weather. So we only have to think back to events like Storm Desmond to know what we're looking at, actually, that the fells are in a poor state. They're described as being in a poor state in the World Heritage Bid document. We have many triple SIs, all of them are described as being in a poor condition. So to preserve that, I think, is highly questionable. That's really where this Reimagining Landscapes conference came from. That it's not good enough, actually. It's really not good enough. So partly, it was partly based on sheep farming, and it was partly based on cultural figures like Wordsworth and Beatrix Potter. Personally, I think if we brought them back today and had them on this platform, they'd be saying, what have you done with all the wildflower meadows? What have you done with, all the species that were here when I lived here? So again, this kind of preservation of the landscape, it's like a fly caught in amber, isn't it? It's like a moment in time, and we're not in that time anymore, and we have to be able to move forwards. So just as an example of Storm Desmond, Pooley Bridge, the community was left without its vital bridge for 5.5 years. And that tells us everything we need to know about what we need the landscape to do for us as communities. So, and just very briefly, you just Google tourist numbers in the Lake District, this is what you get. The National Park tells us there's 18 million a year. The Tourism Board tells us there's 41 million. Well, I don't know what you think, but I don't think they're going to the industrial centres on the west coast like Workington, Whitehaven, going to look at Sellafield, or indeed Barrow-in-Furness. Not that I'm dissing those places at all, but so I think the number is really actually much higher than 18 million. And on a quick Google, I also found out that there's nearly 14,000 Airbnb properties alone. So we're really talking about hyper-tourism industry here. Anyway, so just to set the context, this is a view from a fell called Clough Head, between Penrith and Keswick. And if we were to take a straw poll, I think most people would look at that and think it was beautiful. They would think it was wild. And that's what I thought until I entered into these conversations about what wildness is and about what a healthy ecosystem is. So you can see from this that there's no corridors of connectivity. So that means that most lakeland valleys and fells are actually dead ends for wildlife. There's no ways for them to travel. So there's nothing there, and that should be no surprise, given the circumstances. So my question in this talk is, how we transfigure the landscape into a set of autonomous places that possess the capacity to communicate through their own ecological imperatives. The fact that a living landscape, a living cultural landscape, can never be preserved but rather moves through time under its own prerogatives. So last year I was lead author of a report to an organisation called World Heritage Watch on the future of the Lake District, and we were calling into question the status, preserving this landscape that's highly damaged and not fit for purpose as we move forward into the climate crisis. This is just some of the kind of kickback that we got. On social media, we were described by one of the leading agricultural figures and a kind of mover and shaker for the kind of sheep fraternity as having created a kerfuffle, as if a kerfuffle is how we should describe climate breakdown and ecological loss. So the architects of this World Heritage designation are planners. They're urban planners. They're not ecologists. They're not conservationists. And they tell us that we have to have sheep, and above all. So I think it's really important to say me and my colleagues are not anti-farmers whatsoever. We just believe that we have to find ways to take the farming community with us and to broker, if you like, ways to change and to change the dialogue and to take people forward into the future in a way that's kind of much more fit for purpose. So, okay, enough of what's wrong. Now we'll look at what's going right. So this is the Upper Duddon Valley in the west of the lakes, and this is a project which is a partnership between Leeds University and Forestry England, and it's called Restoring Hard Knot Forest. So Harterfell was covered in industrial conifers, and so of course you can imagine it was a bit of a dead zone ecologically. But what they worked out was that the Duddon actually is one of the most forested valleys in the lakes. So there was an extant seed source in the ground, ready to go. And once they started taking the conifers out, the forest started coming back of its own volition. So I think this is less than 20 years on. This is what's happened. This is where there used to be a hugely dense conifer plantation. That's gone, and it's being gradually taken out, and this is what you get. So, I mean, look at the difference between the near and the far away in this picture. And on the day I climbed up Harterfell to have a look, the birds were singing. We had chiff-chaff, willow warbler, blackcap, you name it. There were dragonflies over the ponds. You know, you give nature what it needs and it bounces back and pays you back. And then you can start to see as you're going higher up the landscape, you're moving into more scrub than tree habitat. And this is my favourite picture. So this is the boundary fence where the sheep and deer are on the top. And there's the juniper, and it's creeping underneath like it's saying, you're not going to stop me. And I think that's really rather wonderful. But if you look at the difference, it's just, what's the problem? What are we talking about here? And so once you start to see this is my kind of idea, not mine alone, mind you, that once we start to make changes in the landscape, people then see the difference. So this is looking towards the Score Fells from the summit. And it's kind of like a scene from Macbeth, actually. It's like a blasted heath. Once you see the difference and you see the living, ecologically rich landscape. So and then there's another project. So restoration projects happen in a much better way where they happen contiguously, where one kind of merges into another. And there's another project called the Upper Duddon Landscape Recovery Project, which is a partnership between Natural England, University of Cumbria. I'll just make sure I get this right. I'll come back to it anyway, but and this is also involving farmers. So this is Paddy Deedee's cattle, and so taking sheep off or reducing sheep numbers and putting in herbivores, which again helps to sort of spread the diversity of the tree source. And then we've got Dalehead Farm up near the top of the valley. This is an old National Trust farm. It's still National Trust, but it's a bit derelict. And the plan is to do it up and use it as a base for volunteers. I've put a picture of some tree tubes in there. So restoring Hard Knot is not, it's not based on planting trees because the forest's doing it for itself, but they are planting trees with volunteers and also creating a seed bank so that volunteers can come in and local school children come in and help plant, so it gives them a sense of purpose and engagement. And Dale Head's going to be a base for those volunteers. And I would just say that figure, John Hinks, he's the project lead. And this is really interesting, I think. He described himself to me as an endangered species because he has a job in the place that he's from and a house in the place that he's from. And those things are shrinkingly rare in the current economy of the Lake District. So this is one of the farmers' wildflower meadows, wildflower nursery. And we've got pollinators coming back. How many minutes have we got left, Richard? Okay, so I'm just going to move on quickly to talk about the Pine Marten reintroduction program in the lakes as well. So this is a pine marten nest den box. That's pine marten poo, scat. The University of Cumbria have been leading this, reintroducing a predator into the Lake District, which is again about driving ecology. There's a picture of some pine martens if you haven't seen one. And the last thing I wanted to talk about is the concept of refuges. So we talk a lot about the human right to roam, but how do we enact a right to roam for wild species in a very, very highly roamed landscape? And that's something I've written about more recently, and just thinking about giving space for those animals. And just lastly, this is an invitation to reimagine what the future needs to be in a place like the lakes. All these animals and birds and plants and insects are native and should be there. And I think they'll get there. So I'll end on that note of hope. Okay.